Hey there, and welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into something extraordinary, something that might change the way you think about your own body. Before we begin, go ahead and get comfortable. Maybe adjust your pillow, pull up that blanket, let your shoulders drop just a little. And if you're enjoying these journeys into the past, a quiet like helps the channel grow, but only if you genuinely find value in what we do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world as the night settles in. Now, dim the lights if you can, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Here's a question worth drifting off to. What if I told you that 10,000 years ago, your ancestors' bodies were almost unrecognizable compared to yours? Not in some dramatic science fiction way, but in small, profound differences that reveal just how much we've changed. Their bones were denser, thicker, built to carry them across endless landscapes. Their teeth told different stories, straighter, stronger, fitting perfectly in jaws that were wider than ours. Their muscles carried them 15, sometimes 20 miles in a single day, not for exercise, but simply as part of living. They didn't sit in chairs, they didn't stare at screens, they didn't eat bread or drink milk, at least not the way we do now. Their bodies moved with the sun, slept under the stars, and responded to a world that was wild, unpredictable, and profoundly different from the one we know. And here's the remarkable part. Those ancient bodies, the ones that walked the earth 10,000 years ago, are still echoing inside you. The blueprint hasn't changed much, but the world around it has changed everything. Tonight, we're going to explore what human bodies were really like 10,000 years ago, before agriculture reshaped our diets, before cities changed how we moved, before the modern world rewired us from the inside out. We'll move slowly through each discovery, each biological truth, letting the science unfold like a gentle conversation. No rush, no stress, just curiosity and the quiet comfort of learning something remarkable as you drift towards sleep. So take a deep breath, let your mind wander back through the millennia, and let's begin this journey together. We start with the very foundation of the human form, the bones that held our ancestors upright. If you could hold a bone from 10,000 years ago in your hand, something from a hunter-gatherer who walked the earth long before cities or farms existed, you'd notice something immediately. It would feel heavier than you'd expect, denser, thicker, almost like it belonged to a different species entirely, but it didn't. That bone came from a human, just like you. And yet, it was built differently, stronger, more resilient, shaped by a life that demanded something from the skeleton that ours simply doesn't anymore. 10,000 years ago, your ancestors had bones that could bear the world, not metaphorically, literally. Their skeletons carried them across vast distances, over rocky terrain, through forests and valleys, up mountains, and along coastlines, every single day. And their bones responded by becoming denser, thicker, and more robust than the bones most of us carry today. This wasn't some genetic mutation or a different version of humanity. It was adaptation. Pure biological adaptation to the demands of their environment. Let's start with bone density. In modern populations, especially in industrialized nations, bone density tends to decline with age. Osteoporosis, the gradual weakening of bones, affects millions of people, particularly older adults. It's so common now that we consider it almost inevitable. But in the skeletal remains of Paleolithic humans, the bones tell a very different story. These bones show minimal signs of the kind of porosity and brittleness we see in modern skeletons. Instead, they're compact, heavy, and remarkably strong, even in individuals who lived well into their 40s or 50s, which was considered old age back then. Why the difference? The answer lies in how bones respond to stress. Bone is living tissue. It's constantly being broken down and rebuilt in a process called remodeling. When you put stress on a bone through weight-bearing activity, walking, running, climbing, carrying heavy loads, the bone responds by laying down more mineral deposits, primarily calcium and phosphorus. This makes the bone denser and stronger. It's the body's way of saying, okay, you're using this a lot, so I'll reinforce it. But when you don't put stress on your bones, the opposite happens. The body starts to reabsorb those minerals, thinking they're not needed. Over time, the bones become lighter, more porous, weaker. Now imagine the life of a Paleolithic human. From the moment they could walk, they were moving. Not on flat sidewalks or paved roads, but on uneven ground, climbing over rocks, wading through streams, carrying children, tools, food, firewood. Their bodies were in constant motion, and that motion was varied and unpredictable. One day might involve walking 15 miles to follow a herd of animals. The next might involve digging for roots, squatting for hours, or hauling large stones to build a shelter. Every movement, every step, every lift put mechanical load on their skeletons, and their bones responded by becoming incredibly strong. Archaeologists have studied the long bones of ancient humans, the femur, the tibia, the humerus, and found that the cortical bone, the dense outer layer, was significantly thicker than what we see in modern populations. In some cases, the difference is as much as 20 to 30%. That's not a small variation. That's a fundamental structural difference, and it wasn't just the long bones. Even the smaller bones of the hands and feet showed remarkable density, likely from gripping tools, climbing trees, and walking barefoot over rough terrain. But bone strength wasn't just about density. It was also about architecture. Bones aren't solid all the way through. They have an outer shell of dense cortical bone and an inner network of trabecular bone, sometimes called spongy bone, which looks like a honeycomb. This trabecular bone is organized along lines of stress, reinforcing the areas that experience the most force. In Paleolithic skeletons, this internal architecture is beautifully optimized. The bone tissue is laid down exactly where it's needed most, creating a structure that's both strong and lightweight. It's the kind of engineering that modern architects try to replicate in buildings and bridges. Diet played a role too. Paleolithic humans ate a wide variety of foods, many of which were rich in the minerals needed for bone health. Leafy greens, nuts, seeds, fish with edible bones, organ meats, all of these provided calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and vitamin D. And because they spent so much time outdoors, they were constantly exposed to sunlight, which allowed their bodies to produce vitamin D naturally. This vitamin is essential for calcium absorption, and without it, bones can't mineralize properly. So their diet and their lifestyle worked together to build skeletons that were incredibly resilient. Contrast that with modern life. Most of us spend the majority of our time sitting in chairs, in cars, at desks, on couches. We walk on flat surfaces. We take elevators instead of stairs. We carry groceries in a cart, not on our backs. Our bones simply aren't subjected to the same kind of mechanical stress that our ancestors' bones were, and as a result, they don't build the same density. Even people who exercise regularly often focus on specific activities, running, cycling, swimming, that don't provide the varied, weight-bearing load that bones need to stay maximally strong. And then there's diet. Many modern diets are deficient in key minerals. Processed foods are often stripped of nutrients, and many people don't get enough vitamin D, especially those who live in northern latitudes or spend most of their time indoors. The result is a population with weaker bones, not because we're genetically inferior, but because our environment no longer demands strong bones. Our bodies are still capable of building dense, resilient skeletons. We just don't give them the opportunity. And this has real consequences. Hip fractures, spinal compression, broken wrists from minor falls. These are all signs of bone fragility that would have been far less common in our ancestors. Their bones could withstand impacts and stresses that would shatter ours. So when you think about the bodies of people who lived 10,000 years ago, start with the foundation. Start with bones that were built by movement, strengthened by load, nourished by a varied diet, and shaped by a life that was physically demanding in ways we can barely imagine. Those bones carried them across continents, through ice ages, into new worlds, and they did it without breaking, without weakening, without the slow decay that so many of us experience today. Our ancestors' skeletons were masterpieces of biological engineering, and they remind us just how much our bodies are shaped by the lives we live. But bones alone weren't enough. They needed something to move them, and that's where the muscles come in. If their bones were the foundation, then their muscles were the engine. And what an engine it was. Not the kind you'd see on a bodybuilder or an Olympic sprinter. No bulging biceps or sculpted abs for the sake of aesthetics. The muscles of your ancestors 10,000 years ago were built for one thing above all else: endurance. The ability to move and keep moving, day after day, mile after mile, without breaking down. They were muscles made for migration, for survival, for a life that never stopped demanding motion. Let's start with a simple fact. The average Paleolithic human walked somewhere between 10 and 15 miles every single day. Some days more, some days less. But that was the baseline. Not on a treadmill, not on a track. Across varied terrain, hills, valleys, rivers, forests, rocky paths, soft sand. They walked to find food. They walked to find water. They walked to follow animal herds or seasonal plants. Walking wasn't exercise, it was existence. And their muscles adapted accordingly. Muscles are made up of fibers, and there are two main types. Fast-twitch fibers, which are built for short bursts of power and speed, and slow-twitch fibers, which are built for endurance and sustained effort. In modern athletes, sprinters tend to have more fast-twitch fibers, while marathon runners have more slow-twitch. But in Paleolithic humans, the ratio was different. Their muscles were dominated by slow-twitch fibers, the kind that can work for hours without fatiguing, because that's exactly what they needed to do. Walk for hours, squat for hours, carry loads for hours. Their bodies didn't need explosive power as much as they needed reliable, steady strength. And here's something fascinating. Paleolithic humans didn't have chairs. They didn't sit the way we do, with our hips at 90 degrees and our backs against a support. Instead, they squatted. Deep, full squats, where the hips drop below the knees and the heels stay flat on the ground. This position, sometimes called a resting squat, was their default. They squatted to cook. They squatted to eat. They squatted to work on tools or tend to children. And squatting like this, for extended periods, requires incredible strength and flexibility in the legs, hips, and lower back. Muscles that modern humans often lose because we simply don't use them anymore. Try it yourself if you can. Not right now, of course, you're getting ready for sleep. But sometime tomorrow, try dropping into a full squat and holding it for even 30 seconds. Most people can't. Their ankles are too tight. Their hips are too stiff. Their knees protest. But for your ancestors, this was as natural as breathing. Their hip flexors, glutes, hamstrings, and calves were all conditioned to support this position effortlessly. And because they used these muscles constantly, they stayed strong and mobile well into old age. Then there's carrying. Paleolithic humans carried everything: firewood, water, food, tools, children. And they didn't carry it in backpacks with padded straps and ergonomic designs. They carried it on their backs, on their heads, in their arms, or slung across their shoulders. This kind of load-bearing activates the entire body. Your core has to stabilize. Your legs have to support the extra weight. Your shoulders, back, and arms have to hold the load in place. Over time, this builds functional strength, the kind of strength that translates directly into real-world tasks, not just lifting weights in a gym. Archaeological evidence supports this. When researchers examine the muscle attachment sites on ancient bones, the places where tendons connected muscle to bone, they find something remarkable. These attachment sites are larger and more pronounced than in modern skeletons. That's because when you use a muscle repeatedly and intensely, the tendon pulling on the bone creates stress, and the bone responds by building up tissue at that attachment point. It's called a muscle marker, and it's a direct record of how much a person used certain muscles during their life. In Paleolithic skeletons, these markers are prominent across the entire body, especially in the legs, back, and shoulders. These were people who used their whole bodies, constantly. But it wasn't just about strength. It was also about flexibility and range of motion. Modern humans often have tight hip flexors from sitting, stiff shoulders from hunching over desks, limited ankle mobility from wearing shoes with elevated heels. But Paleolithic humans moved through a full range of motion every day. They climbed trees, they crawled under branches, they reached overhead to gather fruit, they twisted and turned to track animals or navigate difficult terrain. This constant, varied movement kept their joints mobile and their muscles supple. They didn't need yoga or stretching routines. Their daily life was the routine. And then there's the metabolic side. Muscle tissue is metabolically active. It burns calories even at rest. The more muscle you have, especially slow-twitch endurance muscle, the more efficiently your body uses energy. Paleolithic humans had lean, functional muscle mass that helped them regulate their metabolism naturally. They didn't have the excess body fat that's so common in modern populations, not because they were starving, but because their bodies were constantly in motion, constantly burning fuel, constantly adapting to the demands placed on them. There's also something called fascia, the connective tissue that wraps around muscles and organs and holds everything together. In modern sedentary bodies, fascia can become tight and restricted, leading to pain, stiffness, and limited movement. But in bodies that move constantly and in varied ways, fascia stays pliable and responsive. It adapts to the demands placed on it, providing support where it's needed and flexibility where it's not. Paleolithic humans had fascia that was conditioned by a lifetime of diverse movement, which meant they could transition seamlessly from walking to squatting to climbing to carrying without injury or discomfort. Think about what this means. Your ancestors didn't go to the gym. They didn't do leg day or arm day. They didn't count reps or track their heart rate. And yet they had bodies that were stronger, more resilient, and more functional than most people today. Not because they were genetically superior, but because their environment demanded it. Every day was a full body workout. Every task was an opportunity to build strength, and their muscles responded by becoming exactly what they needed to be: tireless, dependable, and capable of carrying them through a life that was physically demanding in ways we've almost entirely lost. So when we talk about the bodies of people 10,000 years ago, we're not just talking about appearance, we're talking about function, about muscles that were built through use, not through isolated exercises. Muscles that could walk all day, squat for hours, carry heavy loads, and still have energy left over. Muscles that didn't need recovery days because they were designed for constant, varied movement. And muscles that remind us just how much our modern lifestyle has changed the very structure of our bodies. But strong bones and tireless muscles weren't the only differences. There was something else, something visible every time they opened their mouths. Their teeth told a story all their own. Open your mouth and smile. Go ahead, really smile. Now, if you could look closely, really closely, at your teeth, you'd probably see a few things, maybe a filling or two. Perhaps some crowding, where one tooth pushed against another because there wasn't quite enough room. Maybe your wisdom teeth were removed years ago because they came in sideways or caused pain. And if you're like most people, you've probably had at least one cavity in your life, maybe more. All of this feels normal, expected, even. But 10,000 years ago, none of it would have been. Your ancestors had teeth that told a completely different story. Straighter teeth, stronger teeth. Teeth that fit comfortably in jaws that were wider and more robust than ours. Teeth that rarely decayed, even over a lifetime of use. And yes, they kept their wisdom teeth, all of them, without a single visit to an oral surgeon. Their mouths were healthier, not because they had better dentists, they had none, but because their lives, their diets, and their very biology shaped their teeth in ways that ours no longer do. Let's start with the jaw. In Paleolithic skulls, the mandible, the lower jaw, and the maxilla, the upper jaw, are noticeably larger than in modern humans. Not dramatically so, but enough that when you measure them, the difference is clear. These jaws are wider, more U-shaped, with plenty of room for all 32 teeth, including the wisdom teeth at the very back. In modern humans, jaws have become narrower, more V-shaped, and as a result, there's often not enough space. Teeth crowd together. Wisdom teeth get impacted. Orthodontists make careers out of straightening what evolution once aligned naturally. Why did this happen? The answer lies in what we eat and how we eat it. Paleolithic humans ate tough, fibrous foods, raw vegetables, roots that required serious chewing, meat that wasn't always tender, nuts and seeds that needed to be cracked and ground down. This kind of diet required a lot of chewing, and chewing is more than just breaking down food. It's a mechanical force that stimulates the bones of the jaw. When you chew hard, tough foods, especially during childhood when the jaw is still developing, that chewing action encourages the bone to grow outward, creating a wider, more robust structure. It's the same principle we talked about with bones and muscles. Use creates strength. Stress creates adaptation. But in modern diets, especially in industrialized societies, food is soft, bread is fluffy, meat is tender. Vegetables are cooked until they're easy to chew. Even baby food is pureed into mush. Children grow up eating foods that require minimal jaw effort, and, as a result, their jaws don't develop the same width and strength that their ancestors did. By the time they're adults, their mouths are too small for the teeth they're supposed to hold. This isn't a genetic defect, it's an environmental response. Our genes still code for 32 teeth, but our diets no longer code for the jaws to fit them. And then there's tooth decay. Cavities are so common now that we barely think about them. But in Paleolithic populations, dental cavities were extremely rare. When archaeologists examine ancient teeth, they find very little evidence of caries, the scientific term for tooth decay.
Some skeletons show none at all, even in individuals who lived into their 40s or 50s. This wasn't because they brushed and flossed.
They didn't. It was because their diet didn't promote decay. Cavities form when bacteria in the mouth feed on sugars and starches, producing acid as a byproduct. This acid eats away at the enamel, the hard outer layer of the tooth, eventually creating a hole. The more sugar and refined carbohydrates you eat, the more fuel you give to those bacteria, and the more cavities you get. Paleolithic humans ate very little sugar. No candy, no soda, no bread or pasta. The carbohydrates they consumed came from wild plants, roots, fruits, and they were often fibrous and low in simple sugars. Their mouths were not acidic environments. The bacteria that cause decay simply didn't thrive. There's also the question of tooth wear. While Paleolithic teeth didn't decay much, they did wear down. If you look at ancient molars, you'll often see flat surfaces where the enamel has been ground away over years of chewing tough foods. Sometimes the wear is so extreme that the dentin, the layer beneath the enamel, is exposed. But here's the interesting part. Even with all that wear, there's rarely infection or pain. The teeth wore down slowly and evenly, and the pulp inside the tooth, where the nerves and blood vessels are, had time to recede and protect itself. It's a gradual process, not a sudden crack or cavity. And because their diet was so nutrient-dense, their bodies had the resources to maintain healthy teeth even under heavy use. Fast forward to the agricultural revolution around 10,000 years ago, and everything changes. Humans start eating grains. Wheat, barley, rice. These grains are ground into flour and baked into bread. They're sticky, they cling to teeth, and they're loaded with starches that bacteria love. Suddenly, tooth decay becomes common. Skeletal remains from early farming communities show a dramatic increase in cavities compared to hunter-gatherer populations. The teeth are also more crowded because the softer diet leads to smaller jaws. It's one of the clearest examples we have of how a change in diet can reshape human biology in just a few generations. And it's not just decay. Gum disease also becomes more prevalent. In Paleolithic mouths, gums were generally healthy, firm, and pink. But as diet shifted and oral hygiene remained non-existent, inflammation and infection became more common. Periodontitis, the breakdown of the tissues that support the teeth, starts showing up in archaeological records. Teeth begin to loosen and fall out, not from cavities, but from the loss of the bone and tissue holding them in place. This would have been almost unheard of in pre-agricultural populations. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that the teeth you have, the crowding, the cavities, the need for braces or extractions, aren't inevitable. They're the result of a mismatch between your biology and your environment. Your genes are still coding for the teeth of a Paleolithic human, but your diet, your jaw development, and your oral ecosystem are shaped by a modern world that doesn't support that genetic blueprint. Your ancestors had mouths that worked beautifully, because everything about their lives supported dental health. The food they ate, the way they chewed, the bacteria in their mouths. It was all in balance. And here's the remarkable thing. Those teeth, worn down by years of hard use, still functioned, still allowed them to eat, to speak, to survive. They didn't need fillings or crowns or root canals. They just needed a diet and a lifestyle that matched what their bodies were designed for. 10,000 years ago, a healthy mouth wasn't something you had to work at. It was just the natural result of being human. But teeth were only part of the story. What really shaped those ancient bodies was what they put into their mouths every single day. So, what did they actually eat? It's a simple question, but the answer reveals just how far we've drifted from the diet our bodies were designed for. 10,000 years ago, there were no grocery stores, no restaurants, no delivery apps, no refrigerators stocked with leftovers. Food wasn't something you bought. It was something you found, hunted, gathered, and prepared with your own hands. And what you ate depended entirely on where you lived and what season it was. Let's start with what wasn't on the menu. No bread, no pasta, no rice or wheat or any cultivated grains. No dairy products, no milk, no cheese, no yogurt, no refined sugar, no processed oils, no canned goods or frozen dinners. Nothing that required farming, because farming didn't exist yet. The entire foundation of the modern diet, grains, dairy, and processed foods, was completely absent. So, what was left? Everything else. And it was more varied, more nutrient-dense, and more challenging to obtain than anything most of us eat today. The bulk of the Paleolithic diet came from plants, wild plants, not the domesticated vegetables you find in a supermarket, but their wild ancestors. Roots like wild carrots and tubers, leafy greens that were tougher and more bitter than modern lettuce, nuts like acorns, walnuts, and hazelnuts, seeds from grasses and flowering plants, berries, wild apples, figs, and other fruits, but only when they were in season. These weren't the sweet, cultivated fruits we eat today. Wild fruits were smaller, more fibrous, often sour or astringent. They hadn't been bred for sweetness over thousands of years. They were what nature provided, and your ancestors ate them gratefully. Then there was meat, but not in the quantities you might imagine. Hunting large animals was difficult, dangerous, and not always successful. A mammoth or a deer could feed a group for days, but kills like that didn't happen every day. More often, the meat came from smaller animals. Rabbits, birds, fish, shellfish. And when a large animal was killed, nothing went to waste. They ate the muscle, of course, but they also ate the organs, the liver, kidneys, heart, and brain. Organ meats are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, packed with vitamins and minerals that muscle meat simply doesn't have. Bone marrow was prized, cracked open, and scooped out for its rich fat content. Even the bones themselves were boiled to make broth, extracting collagen and minerals. Fat was valuable. In a world without abundant carbohydrates, fat was the primary source of long-term energy. Animal fat, fish oils, nuts, seeds. These provided the calories needed to fuel a body that was constantly in motion. And unlike the refined vegetable oils we use today, these were whole food fats, unprocessed and nutrient-rich. Your ancestors didn't fear fat. They sought it out. It kept them warm, it kept them energized, it kept them alive. But here's what made the Paleolithic diet truly unique. It was seasonal and cyclical. In the summer and fall, when fruits and nuts were abundant, they ate more carbohydrates. Their bodies stored some of that energy as fat, preparing for the leaner months ahead. In winter and early spring, when plant foods were scarce, they relied more heavily on whatever meat and fish they could find, along with stored nuts and preserved foods. This meant their metabolism was constantly shifting, adapting to what was available. Sometimes they ate more, sometimes they ate less, sometimes they went days without a large meal. This wasn't starvation. It was the natural rhythm of life in a world without constant food availability. And there was no snacking. None. You didn't carry granola bars in your pocket or grab a handful of crackers between meals. You ate when food was available, and then you didn't eat again until the next meal, which might be hours away or even a full day. This gave your digestive system time to rest. It allowed your body to fully process what you'd eaten, and it kept insulin levels low and stable, which meant your body could easily switch between burning glucose for energy and burning fat. This metabolic flexibility is something most modern humans have lost. We eat so frequently and so many carbohydrates that our bodies stay locked in glucose-burning mode and struggle to access stored fat for fuel. The fiber content of the Paleolithic diet was extraordinary. Estimates suggest they consumed somewhere between 50 and 100 grams of fiber per day. Compare that to the average modern intake of about 15 grams, and you start to see the gap. All those wild plants, roots, leaves, seeds, and fruits were loaded with indigestible fiber that fed the bacteria in their guts. And those bacteria, in turn, produced short-chain fatty acids that reduced inflammation, supported immune function, and even influenced mood and cognition. Their guts were ecosystems, thriving and diverse, shaped by a diet that modern processed foods simply can't replicate. There's also the question of micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. Because the Paleolithic diet was so varied, it provided a wide spectrum of nutrients that many modern diets lack. Vitamin C from wild fruits and greens, vitamin D from sun exposure and fatty fish, iron from organ meats, calcium from leafy plants and small fish bones, omega-3 fatty acids from fish and wild game, magnesium, zinc, selenium, all present in abundance. They didn't need supplements. Their food was the supplement. But perhaps the most important thing about their diet was what it didn't contain. No additives, no preservatives, no artificial colors or flavors. No high fructose corn syrup, no trans fats, no pesticides or herbicides. Everything they ate was whole, unprocessed, and recognizable. An apple was an apple. A fish was a fish. There were no ingredient lists, no nutrition labels, no debates about whether something was healthy or not. Food was just food, and it nourished them completely. Now, this doesn't mean the Paleolithic diet was perfect or that we should all try to replicate it exactly. That's neither practical nor necessary. But it does show us something important. It shows us that the human body evolved on a diet that was diverse, nutrient-dense, high in fiber, and free from processed ingredients. It shows us that our metabolism, our gut bacteria, and even our genes are still adapted to that way of eating, even though most of us no longer eat that way. And it reminds us that the foods we consider normal today, bread, pasta, sugar, processed snacks, are evolutionary newcomers. Our bodies are still learning how to handle them, and often they're struggling. So when you think about what your ancestors ate 10,000 years ago, don't imagine deprivation or blandness. Imagine variety. Imagine richness. Imagine a diet that changed with the seasons, that required effort to obtain, and that nourished every cell in the body. They ate to survive, yes, but they also ate in a way that kept their bodies strong, their minds clear, and their guts thriving. And all of that started in the place where food truly matters most, deep inside where digestion begins. The gut. It's not glamorous. It's not something most of us think about, unless something goes wrong. But 10,000 years ago, your ancestors had guts that were fundamentally different from yours. Not in structure, the anatomy is largely the same, but in function, in the ecosystem living inside them, in the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms that made their digestive systems work like finely tuned machines. Their guts were shaped by the wild, and in many ways, they were healthier, more diverse, and more resilient than the guts most of us carry today. Let's talk about the microbiome. That's the collection of microorganisms living in your digestive tract, primarily in your large intestine. You have billions of them right now, representing hundreds of different species. They help you digest food, produce vitamins, regulate your immune system, and even influence your mood and sleep. But here's the thing. The diversity of your microbiome matters. The more different species you have, the more robust and adaptable your gut becomes. And in Paleolithic humans, that diversity was off the charts. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer populations, groups like the Hadza in Tanzania, who still live much like our ancestors did, show us what a truly diverse microbiome looks like. These populations have microbial communities that are far richer and more varied than those found in people living in industrialized nations. They carry bacterial species that most modern humans have lost entirely, and the reason is simple: diet. The Hadza eat over 600 different species of plants and animals throughout the year. That variety feeds a huge range of gut bacteria, each one specialized to break down different types of fiber, starches, and plant compounds. Now compare that to a typical modern diet. Many people eat the same 10 or 15 foods over and over: bread, chicken, rice, pasta, a handful of vegetables, maybe some fruit. The lack of variety starves entire populations of gut bacteria. Without the specific fibers and compounds they need to survive, those bacterial species die off. And once they're gone, they're not easy to get back. Your microbiome becomes less diverse, less resilient, and less capable of performing all the functions your body depends on. Fiber is the key. Not just any fiber, but the kind found in wild plants. Paleolithic humans consumed somewhere between 50 and 100 grams of fiber every day. To put that in perspective, most modern adults get around 15 grams. That's a massive difference. And it's not just about the quantity, it's about the type. Wild plants contain complex, varied fibers that feed different species of bacteria. Some fibers are fermented quickly. Others take longer. Some produce gas. Others produce short-chain fatty acids, compounds that reduce inflammation and support the gut lining. All of this activity creates a thriving, balanced ecosystem. When bacteria ferment fiber, they produce something called butyrate. It's a short-chain fatty acid that serves as the primary fuel source for the cells lining your colon. Butyrate keeps those cells healthy, reduces inflammation, and even plays a role in regulating the immune system. Paleolithic guts produced butyrate in abundance because they were constantly fed the fiber needed to make it. Modern guts, starved of fiber, produce far less, and when the gut lining doesn't get enough butyrate, it becomes weaker, more permeable, and more prone to inflammation. This is one of the mechanisms behind conditions like inflammatory bowel disease and leaky gut syndrome, both of which were virtually non-existent in pre-agricultural populations. But it's not just about what they ate. It's also about what they didn't eat. No antibiotics. No processed foods with preservatives that kill bacteria. No artificial sweeteners that disrupt microbial balance. Their microbiomes were shaped entirely by natural exposure. They drank water from streams, ate plants pulled from the ground, and handled raw meat and fish. All of this introduced microbes into their systems, not harmful pathogens necessarily, but environmental bacteria that added to the diversity of their gut ecosystems. It sounds unsanitary by modern standards, but it actually strengthened their microbiome. There's also the question of parasites. Yes, Paleolithic humans had parasites. Intestinal worms, protozoa, other organisms that lived inside them. And while that sounds horrifying, recent research suggests that some of these parasites may have played a beneficial role. Certain helminths, intestinal worms, have been shown to modulate the immune system, reducing inflammation and preventing autoimmune reactions. They essentially train the immune system to be less reactive, less prone to attacking the body's own tissues. Modern humans, living in sanitized environments, no longer have these parasites. And some scientists believe that's one reason why autoimmune diseases and allergies have skyrocketed in recent decades. Our immune systems, without the parasites they evolved alongside, have become hyperactive and misdirected. The gut and the brain are also deeply connected through something called the gut-brain axis. This is a communication network that runs between your digestive system and your central nervous system, primarily through the vagus nerve. The bacteria in your gut produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and gamma-aminobutyric acid, all of which influence mood, anxiety, and sleep. In fact, about 90% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut, not the brain. When your microbiome is diverse and healthy, this communication flows smoothly. When it's disrupted, it can lead to mood disorders, anxiety, and even sleep disturbances. Paleolithic humans had guts that supported stable mood and restful sleep, not because they had better genetics, but because their microbiomes were thriving. The bacteria in their guts produced the right balance of neurotransmitters. The short-chain fatty acids reduced inflammation, which in turn reduced stress hormones like cortisol. And their digestive systems worked efficiently, without the bloating, cramping, or discomfort that so many modern people experience. They didn't need probiotics or supplements. Their diet and lifestyle provided everything their guts needed to function optimally. And then there's the simple fact that their digestive tracts were shorter but more efficient. Without the constant load of processed foods and refined sugars, their guts didn't have to work as hard. Food moved through at a steady pace, nutrients were absorbed efficiently, and waste was eliminated regularly. There was no chronic constipation, no irritable bowel syndrome, no acid reflux. These conditions, so common now, were rare or non-existent in populations living on whole, unprocessed diets. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that the gut is not just a tube that processes food. It's an ecosystem, a living, breathing community of organisms that profoundly affects your overall health. And that ecosystem is shaped by what you feed it. 10,000 years ago, human guts were fed a diet of wild, diverse, fiber-rich foods. They were exposed to natural bacteria and even beneficial parasites. They produced the compounds needed to support the gut lining, regulate the immune system, and communicate with the brain. And as a result, they functioned beautifully. But a thriving gut is only part of the equation. What really mattered was how efficiently those ancient bodies could use the food they worked so hard to find. Your body is an engine, and like any engine, it needs fuel. But here's where it gets interesting. 10,000 years ago, your ancestors had engines that could run on two completely different types of fuel, and they could switch between them seamlessly depending on what was available. One day, they might burn glucose, the sugar that comes from carbohydrates. The next day, they might burn fat, stored in their own tissues or consumed from animal. This ability to switch fuels, to adapt metabolically to whatever food was around, is called metabolic flexibility. And it's something most modern humans have lost. Let's start with how metabolism works. When you eat carbohydrates, your body breaks them down into glucose, a simple sugar that your cells can use for energy. Glucose enters your bloodstream, and your pancreas releases insulin, a hormone that tells your cells to take up that glucose and either use it immediately or store it for later. If you eat more carbohydrates than your body needs right away, the excess glucose gets stored in your liver and muscles as glycogen. Once those storage sites are full, any remaining glucose gets converted into fat. This is normal. It's how your body saves energy for times when food might be scarce. But here's the catch. If you're constantly eating carbohydrates, constantly spiking your blood sugar and insulin levels, your body never gets the signal to burn stored fat. It stays locked in glucose burning mode. Insulin stays elevated. And over time, your cells can become less responsive to insulin, a condition called insulin resistance. This forces your pancreas to produce even more insulin to get the same effect. Eventually, this can lead to metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and a host of other health problems. It's a cascade that starts with too much, too often. Paleolithic humans didn't have this problem, not because they had better genes, but because they didn't eat constantly. Their meals were spaced out, sometimes by many hours, sometimes by a full day or more, and their diet was relatively low in carbohydrates compared to modern standards. Yes, they ate fruits, roots, and tubers, but these were seasonal and came with plenty of fiber, which slows down glucose absorption. There was no bread, no rice, no pasta, no concentrated sources of starch that flood the bloodstream with sugar all at once. As a result, their insulin levels stayed low and stable most of the time. When insulin is low, your body can access stored fat for energy. This process is called lipolysis, the breakdown of fat into fatty acids that can be burned by your cells. And when fat is burned in the absence of carbohydrates, your liver produces ketones, an alternative fuel source that your brain and muscles can use just as efficiently as glucose. This metabolic state, called ketosis, was probably a regular occurrence for Paleolithic humans, especially during winter or periods when plant foods were scarce. Their bodies slipped into fat-burning mode naturally, without effort, without the need for special diets or fasting protocols. It was just how their metabolism worked. This ability to shift between fuel sources gave them a huge survival advantage. Imagine going 2 days without food. For most modern people, that would be miserable. Energy crashes, brain fog, intense hunger, irritability. But for someone with metabolic flexibility, it's manageable. When glucose isn't available, the body simply switches to burning fat. Energy stays steady. The brain gets the fuel it needs from ketones. Hunger is present, but not debilitating. You can still think clearly, move purposefully, and function normally. That's metabolic flexibility in action. There's also the question of insulin sensitivity. When your cells respond well to insulin, they can take up glucose efficiently, keeping blood sugar levels stable and preventing the pancreas from overworking. Paleolithic humans had excellent insulin sensitivity. Their muscles were constantly active, which uses up glucose and keeps the cells receptive to insulin signals. Their diet didn't overwhelm their system with carbohydrates, and their intermittent eating patterns gave their bodies regular breaks from insulin production. The result was a metabolism that worked smoothly, without the spikes and crashes that plague so many modern people. Hormones also played a role. When you go without food for an extended period, your body releases hormones like glucagon and growth hormone that help preserve muscle mass and mobilize stored fat. These hormones rise naturally during fasting, ensuring that your body burns fat instead of breaking down muscle for energy. Paleolithic humans experienced these hormonal shifts regularly, and their bodies adapted by becoming very efficient at fat burning. Modern humans, eating 3 meals a day plus snacks, rarely give their bodies the chance to enter this state. The hormones that promote fat burning never get fully activated, and the metabolism stays stuck in storage mode. Then there's the mitochondria. These are the tiny powerhouses inside your cells that produce energy, and they can burn either glucose or fat. But here's the thing. When you only ever burn glucose, your mitochondria become specialized for that. They get good at processing sugar, but less efficient at processing fat. On the other hand, when you regularly burn fat, your mitochondria adapt. They become better at extracting energy from fatty acids, and they can even increase in number, a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. Paleolithic humans, with their varied and intermittent eating patterns, had mitochondria that were versatile and robust, capable of handling whatever fuel came their way. There's also a connection between metabolic flexibility and inflammation. When your body is constantly running on glucose, especially from refined carbohydrates and sugars, it produces more inflammatory compounds. High insulin levels promote inflammation. Blood sugar spikes create oxidative stress. Over time, this chronic low-grade inflammation contributes to a wide range of diseases, from heart disease to Alzheimer's. But when your metabolism can switch to fat burning, inflammation tends to decrease. Ketones themselves have anti-inflammatory properties. Stable blood sugar reduces oxidative stress. The entire system calms down. And here's something fascinating. Metabolic flexibility may have even influenced sleep. When your blood sugar is stable and your body isn't constantly spiking insulin, your hormones stay balanced. Cortisol, the stress hormone, doesn't surge in the middle of the night trying to raise blood sugar levels. Melatonin production isn't disrupted by late-night snacking. Your body can settle into deep, restorative sleep because it's not metabolically stressed. Paleolithic humans, with their flexible metabolisms and stable blood sugar, likely slept more soundly than most people do today, not because they were exhausted, though they often were, but because their bodies were in metabolic harmony. So what does all this mean? It means that 10,000 years ago, the human body was designed to handle variability, feast and famine. Carbohydrates when available, fat when not. Meals spaced far apart, with long periods of fasting in between. This created a metabolism that was adaptable, resilient, and efficient. Modern life, with its constant access to food and carbohydrate-heavy diets, has taken that flexibility away from most of us. Our bodies can still do it. The machinery is still there, but it's rusty from disuse. And that metabolic inflexibility is at the root of many modern health problems. But metabolism alone wasn't enough to keep them alive. They also needed something else, something invisible but incredibly powerful, an immune system that could fight off the dangers lurking in every shadow. The world 10,000 years ago was dangerous. Predators hunted in the dark. Injuries could turn fatal in days. Infections lurked in every cut, every scrape, every bite. And yet, your ancestors survived. Not because they had medicine, they didn't. Not because they could sterilize wounds or take antibiotics. Those didn't exist. They survived because their immune systems were extraordinarily well trained, shaped by constant exposure to the natural world, and capable of mounting defenses that most modern immune systems have never had to learn. Let's start with a concept that might sound counterintuitive. Exposure to germs, to dirt, to parasites, to all the microscopic life in the environment actually made Paleolithic humans healthier, not sicker, healthier. This idea is called the hygiene hypothesis, and it suggests that our modern obsession with cleanliness while preventing some infections has also prevented our immune systems from developing properly. When you grow up in a sanitized environment, your immune system doesn't get the training it needs. It becomes hypersensitive, reactive, prone to attacking things that aren't actually threats, like pollen or pet dander, or even your own tissues. Paleolithic children grew up surrounded by dirt. They crawled on the ground, they played in streams, they touched animals. They ate food that hadn't been washed or cooked to sterility. And all of this exposed them to a huge variety of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites. Most of these organisms weren't harmful. They were just part of the environment. But their presence trained the developing immune system to recognize what was dangerous and what wasn't. This process, called immune education, is critical. Without it, the immune system can't distinguish between real threats and harmless substances. In modern populations, especially in industrialized countries, children are raised in much cleaner environments. Antibacterial soaps, sanitized surfaces, filtered water, pasteurized milk, vaccinations, which are beneficial and important, but sterile environments overall. The immune system doesn't get exposed to the same diversity of microbes. And as a result, rates of allergies, asthma, and autoimmune diseases have skyrocketed. These conditions were rare or non-existent in pre-agricultural populations. Archaeological evidence shows very few signs of the chronic inflammatory diseases that plague modern societies. The difference isn't genetic, it's environmental. One key player in this immune education is something we've already talked about: parasites, specifically helminths, intestinal worms. These parasites were common in Paleolithic humans. They lived in the gut, feeding on nutrients and reproducing. And while that sounds unpleasant, recent research has revealed something surprising. Helminths actually help regulate the immune system. They produce compounds that dampen inflammatory responses, preventing the immune system from overreacting. In populations where helminths are still common, rates of autoimmune diseases and allergies are significantly lower. When those populations move to developed countries and lose their parasites through improved sanitation, their rates of these diseases rise to match the local population within a generation or two. This doesn't mean we should all go out and get infected with worms, but it does tell us something important. The human immune system evolved in the presence of these parasites. It learned to function with them as part of the ecosystem. and without them, the immune system can become dysregulated, attacking things it shouldn't. Some researchers are even experimenting with therapeutic helminth infections to treat conditions like Crohn's disease and multiple sclerosis, with promising results. It's a strange idea, using parasites as medicine, but it highlights just how much our immune systems have changed in the absence of the organisms they evolved alongside. Then there's the question of acute infections. Paleolithic humans didn't live in cities. They lived in small, mobile groups, usually no more than 20 to 50 people. This meant that infectious diseases, the kind that spread rapidly through dense populations, were rare. There were no pandemics, no plagues, no outbreaks of cholera or typhoid or smallpox. Those diseases didn't emerge until humans began farming and living in permanent settlements, where close quarters and poor sanitation allowed pathogens to spread easily. In the Paleolithic, if someone got sick, they either recovered quickly or died. But the disease didn't spread far because there simply weren't enough people in close contact to sustain an outbreak. What they did face were injuries and localized infections. A cut from a sharp rock, a bite from an animal, a thorn embedded in the skin. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, these injuries had to be dealt with by the immune system alone, and in most cases, it worked. The body's innate immune response, the first line of defense, is incredibly powerful. White blood cells rush to the site of injury, engulfing bacteria and releasing compounds that kill pathogens. Inflammation, which we often think of as bad, is actually a healing response. It brings blood, nutrients, and immune cells to the area that needs them. As long as the infection didn't spread too quickly or overwhelm the system, the body could fight it off. Paleolithic humans also had something else working in their favor, a balanced inflammatory response. Inflammation is necessary for healing, but chronic inflammation, the kind that persists even when there's no injury or infection, is harmful. It damages tissues, contributes to heart disease, disrupts sleep, and accelerates aging. Modern humans, with their processed diets, sedentary lifestyles, and constant low-level stress, often live in a state of chronic inflammation. But Paleolithic humans, with their whole food diets, active lifestyles, and well-trained immune systems, had inflammation that was acute when needed and quiet the rest of the time. This balance allowed their bodies to heal efficiently without the collateral damage that chronic inflammation causes. There's also a fascinating connection between the immune system and sleep. When you're fighting an infection, your body produces cytokines, signaling molecules that coordinate the immune response. Some of these cytokines also promote sleep. They make you feel tired, encouraging you to rest so your body can focus its energy on healing. This is why you feel exhausted when you're sick. It's not a side effect, it's intentional. Sleep enhances immune function. During deep sleep, your body produces more immune cells, repairs tissues, and consolidates immune memory, the ability to recognize and respond to pathogens you've encountered before. Paleolithic humans, with their physically demanding lives and deep restorative sleep, gave their immune systems the rest they needed to function optimally. And here's something that might surprise you. Stress, the chronic, unrelenting kind, suppresses immune function. When cortisol, the stress hormone, stays elevated for long periods, it inhibits the production of immune cells and dampens inflammatory responses. Paleolithic humans experience stress, of course. The stress of a hunt, the stress of a dangerous animal nearby. But this was acute stress, short-lived, and followed by relief. They didn't experience the chronic stress of modern life, the kind that comes from work deadlines, financial worries, traffic jams, or constant digital stimulation. Their stress hormones spiked when needed and then returned to baseline, allowing their immune systems to stay vigilant and effective.
So what does all this tell us? It tells us that the immune system of a Paleolithic human was robust, not because it was never challenged,
but because it was constantly challenged in the right ways. It was trained from childhood through exposure to diverse microbes. It was regulated by parasites that prevented overreaction. It was supported by a diet rich in anti-inflammatory compounds and a lifestyle that promoted deep, restorative sleep. And it operated in an environment where acute infections were fought off efficiently without the chronic inflammation that plagues modern bodies. 10,000 years ago, the immune system wasn't just a defense mechanism. It was a finely tuned system that kept the body in balance, ready to respond when needed and quiet when it wasn't. But all of this resilience, this strength, this balance, it all depended on one more thing. Something simple, something we take for granted, but something they understood instinctively: rest. When the sun went down 10,000 years ago, the world didn't just get darker, it transformed. The sounds changed, the temperature dropped, the very air felt different. And your ancestors, without streetlights or screens or any way to push back against the night, did the only thing they could do. They rested. Not because they had alarm clocks to set or work schedules to keep. They rested because their bodies told them to. Because darkness meant safety near the fire, and safety meant sleep. Deep, uninterrupted, restorative sleep that most modern humans can only dream about. Let's start with the most obvious difference. No artificial light. None. When the sun set, the only light came from fire, and firelight is very different from the light we're surrounded by today. Fire produces warm, amber tones, light in the red and orange spectrum. This type of light doesn't suppress melatonin, the hormone that tells your body it's time to sleep. In fact, it supports it. Sitting around a fire in the evening gently signals to your brain that night is coming, that it's time to wind down. Your body begins producing melatonin naturally, gradually, preparing you for sleep. Compare that to modern life. We're exposed to bright, artificial light well into the night. LED bulbs, computer screens, televisions, smartphones, all of these emit blue light, the same wavelength that the sun produces during the day. Blue light is powerful. It suppresses melatonin production. It tells your brain that it's still daytime, that you need to stay alert. Even if you're exhausted, even if you want to sleep, blue light keeps your body in wake mode. Paleolithic humans never faced this problem. When the sun went down, their bodies received a clear, unambiguous signal. Night has arrived, time to sleep. But it wasn't just about light. It was also about activity. By the time evening arrived, Paleolithic humans were tired. Genuinely, physically tired. They'd spent the day walking, gathering, hunting, building, carrying. Their bodies had burned through energy. Their muscles were fatigued. Their minds were ready to rest. This kind of physical exhaustion is a natural sleep aid. When your body has worked hard, it craves recovery. Sleep becomes not just desirable, but necessary. Modern humans, many of whom spend their days sitting, don't experience this same level of physical fatigue. We might feel mentally tired, stressed, or burnt out, but our bodies haven't moved enough to demand the deep rest that comes from true physical exertion. There's also something fascinating about how Paleolithic humans may have slept. Historical and anthropological evidence suggests that before the Industrial Revolution, and likely for thousands of years before that, humans practiced what's called biphasic sleep. This means they didn't sleep in one continuous 8-hour block. the way we're told to today. Instead, they slept in two phases. First sleep began shortly after sunset and lasted for 3 to 4 hours. Then they woke naturally, in the middle of the night, and stayed awake for an hour or two. During this time, they might tend the fire, talk quietly, reflect, or simply rest in the darkness. Then they returned to sleep for another 3 to 4 hours, waking naturally at dawn. This wasn't insomnia. It was a natural pattern, deeply embedded in human biology. This wakeful period in the middle of the night was calm, peaceful, almost meditative. There was no stress about being awake, no anxiety about falling back asleep. It was simply part of the rhythm. Some historians believe this period was used for quiet activities, prayer, intimacy, or creative thinking. The mind, rested from the first phase of sleep but not yet ready for full wakefulness, existed in a liminal state that was uniquely conducive to insight and reflection. Modern humans, when they wake in the middle of the night, often panic. They check the clock, worry about how much sleep they're losing, and flood their systems with stress hormones that make it harder to fall back asleep. But for our ancestors, waking in the night was normal, expected, and not a problem at all. Then there's the depth of sleep itself. Paleolithic humans likely spent more time in deep sleep, also called slow-wave sleep, than most modern people do. Deep sleep is the most restorative stage. It's when your body repairs tissues, builds bone and muscle, strengthens the immune system, and consolidates memories. It's also when growth hormone is released, which is essential for cellular repair and metabolism. To reach deep sleep, your body needs to feel safe, relaxed, and free from stimulation. Paleolithic humans, sleeping near their group around a fire, in the quiet darkness of the natural world, had all of these conditions. Their nervous systems could fully relax. Their bodies could enter the deepest stages of rest without interruption. Modern sleep is often fragmented. We're woken by noise, by light seeping through windows, by temperature fluctuations, by stress and anxiety. Even when we do sleep, we often don't reach the deepest stages. We hover in lighter sleep, where the brain is still somewhat alert, still processing, still responsive to external stimuli. This means we wake up feeling unrefreshed, even if we technically slept for 7 or 8 hours. Paleolithic humans didn't have this problem. Their sleep was deep because their environment supported it. No alarms, no notifications, no intrusive light or sound, just darkness, silence, and the natural rhythm of the body settling into rest. There's also the role of temperature. Sleep is regulated in part by body temperature. As you prepare for sleep, your core temperature drops slightly, signaling to your brain that it's time to rest. Paleolithic humans slept outdoors or in simple shelters where temperatures naturally dropped at night. They might have huddled together for warmth or slept near a fire, but the ambient air was cool. This helped their bodies reach the optimal temperature for sleep. Modern homes are often heated or air-conditioned to stay at a constant temperature, which can interfere with this natural cooling process. Some people sleep in rooms that are too warm, which makes it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. Paleolithic humans, by contrast, slept in conditions that naturally supported the body's thermoregulation. And then there's the psychological component. Paleolithic humans didn't lie awake worrying about bills, deadlines, or social media notifications. Their concerns were immediate and concrete. Is the fire still burning? Is everyone safe? Is there food for tomorrow? These were real concerns, but they weren't the kind of abstract, chronic worries that plague modern minds. When they closed their eyes, they could rest. There was no endless mental loop of planning, ruminating, or anxiety. Sleep came easily because their minds, like their bodies, were ready for it.
Dreams were also culturally significant.
Many indigenous cultures, both past and present, place great importance on dreams as sources of guidance, insight, and connection to the spiritual world. Paleolithic humans likely experienced vivid, meaningful dreams during their long, deep sleep cycles. And because they woke naturally, without alarms, they often remembered their dreams and could reflect on them upon waking. This relationship with dreaming has been largely lost in modern culture, where we often wake abruptly and rush immediately into the demands of the day, forgetting our dreams within minutes. So when you think about sleep 10,000 years ago, don't imagine restless nights or uncomfortable conditions. Imagine sleep that was natural, deep, and restorative. Sleep that followed the sun, that responded to physical exhaustion, and that was supported by an environment free from artificial light and modern stressors. Paleolithic humans slept the way our bodies were designed to sleep, and because of that, they woke refreshed, energized, and ready to face another day. But sleep wasn't just governed by darkness and firelight. It was part of something even deeper, a rhythm that pulsed through every cell in their bodies, guided by the most reliable clock in the natural world. The sun rises, the sun sets, day becomes night, night becomes day. This rhythm, this endless cycle of light and dark, has governed life on Earth for billions of years. And every living organism, from the smallest bacteria to the largest whale, has evolved to respond to it. Your ancestors 10,000 years ago were no exception. Their bodies were perfectly synchronized with the sun, attuned to its rising and setting in ways that shaped not just their sleep, but their entire physiology. This internal timekeeping system is called the circadian rhythm, and it's one of the most fundamental aspects of human biology. But in the modern world, we've disrupted it in ways our ancestors never could have imagined. Let's start with what circadian rhythms actually are. Inside nearly every cell in your body is a molecular clock, a collection of genes and proteins that cycle on a roughly 24-hour schedule. These clocks regulate when certain processes happen, when to release hormones, when to repair tissues, when to ramp up digestion or slow it down, when to feel alert, and when to feel sleepy. All of these processes are coordinated by a master clock located in a tiny region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. And the SCN is reset every day by the most powerful time cue available: light. When light enters your eyes, it's detected not just by the rods and cones that allow you to see, but also by specialized cells that send signals directly to the SCN. This tells your brain what time of day it is. Bright light, especially blue light from the sun, signals morning. It suppresses melatonin production, raises cortisol levels, and tells your body to wake up, to be alert, to start the day. As the sun moves across the sky and evening approaches, the light changes. It becomes warmer, softer, less intense. This signals to the SCN that night is coming and melatonin production begins to rise. By the time darkness falls, melatonin levels are high, body temperature starts to drop, and the entire system shifts into rest mode. Paleolithic humans experienced this light cycle in its purest form. They woke with the sunrise. Their eyes were flooded with natural light, which reset their circadian clocks and started the cascade of hormones that promote wakefulness and energy. Throughout the day, they remained outdoors, exposed to bright sunlight that kept their internal clocks aligned. As evening approached, the light dimmed naturally. They gathered around fires, which emit warm, low-intensity light that doesn't disrupt melatonin production. And when they finally lay down to sleep, it was in complete darkness, allowing melatonin to reach its peak and deep sleep to take hold. Their circadian rhythms were perfectly synchronized with the environment. There was no jet lag, no social jet lag from staying up late on weekends, no confusion about what time it was. Their bodies simply knew. Modern humans face a very different situation. We wake to alarm clocks, often before the sun rises, in dark bedrooms where our brains receive no light signal to suppress melatonin. We stumble through the morning in artificially lit indoor spaces that are far dimmer than natural sunlight. Our circadian clocks don't get the strong morning signal they need to fully reset. Then, in the evening, when our bodies should be winding down, we're exposed to bright artificial light from screens, overhead lights, and devices. This light, especially the blue wavelengths, tells our brains it's still daytime. Melatonin production is suppressed. The internal clock gets confused, and by the time we finally turn off the lights and try to sleep, our bodies aren't ready. We lie awake, frustrated, wondering why sleep won't come. The answer is simple. Our circadian rhythms are out of sync. There's also the issue of seasonal changes. 10,000 years ago, day length varied with the seasons. In summer, days were long, and Paleolithic humans were active for more hours. In winter, days were short, and they naturally spent more time resting. Their circadian rhythms adjusted to these changes because they were always outdoors, always exposed to the natural light cycle. This seasonal variation in activity and rest is deeply embedded in human biology. Even today, people tend to feel more energetic in the spring and summer, and more lethargic in the fall and winter. This isn't laziness. It's biology. But modern life, with its constant artificial lighting and indoor lifestyles, flattens out these seasonal rhythms. We're expected to maintain the same level of productivity year-round, regardless of day length or season. This constant demand, this lack of seasonal variation, puts stress on the circadian system. Vitamin D production is another piece of the puzzle. Vitamin D is synthesized in the skin when it's exposed to ultraviolet B radiation from the sunday. Paleolithic humans, spending most of their time outdoors, produced vitamin D in abundance. This vitamin is crucial not just for bone health, but also for immune function, mood regulation, and even sleep quality. Low vitamin D levels have been linked to sleep disorders, depression, and a weakened immune system. Modern humans, especially those living in northern latitudes or spending most of their time indoors, often have inadequate vitamin D levels. This deficiency can disrupt circadian rhythms and contribute to poor sleep. Paleolithic humans didn't have this problem. Their bodies produced all the vitamin D they needed simply by being outside. Then there's cortisol, the stress hormone that's also deeply tied to circadian rhythms. Cortisol follows a daily pattern. It should be highest in the morning, helping you wake up and feel alert, and lowest at night, allowing your body to relax and prepare for sleep. Paleolithic humans had cortisol rhythms that aligned perfectly with the sunday. They woke with rising cortisol, felt energized during the day, and experienced a natural decline in the evening. But modern life disrupts this pattern. Chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated throughout the day and into the night. Irregular sleep schedules flatten the cortisol curve. Lack of morning light delays the cortisol peak. And all of this contributes to feeling tired in the morning, wired at night, and unable to achieve the deep, restorative sleep that comes from a properly functioning circadian system. Interestingly, there's also evidence that circadian rhythms affect more than just sleep. They influence metabolism, digestion, immune function, and even cognitive performance. Your body performs certain tasks better at certain times of day. Digestion is most efficient in the morning and afternoon. Muscle strength peaks in the late afternoon. Memory consolidation happens during sleep. Paleolithic humans lived in harmony with these rhythms because they had no choice. They ate when food was available and light permitted. They rested when darkness fell. Their bodies operated on a schedule that matched the natural world. Modern humans, with 24-hour access to food, artificial light, and constant stimulation, override these natural rhythms. We eat late at night when digestion is sluggish. We try to focus on complex tasks when our brains are primed for rest. We force our bodies to function out of sync with their internal clocks, and we pay for it with fatigue, poor health, and disrupted sleep. There's also something called social jet lag, a phenomenon where your sleep schedule on weekdays differs significantly from your sleep schedule on weekends. Maybe you wake up at 6 in the morning for work, but on weekends you sleep until 10. This creates a mismatch between your internal clock and your actual sleep schedule, similar to the jet lag you'd experience from traveling across time zones. Your body doesn't know what schedule to follow, and as a result, you feel perpetually out of sync. Paleolithic humans didn't experience social jet lag. Their sleep schedule was consistent, governed by the sun, not by work obligations or social commitments. Their circadian rhythms stayed stable, day after day, season after season. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that the human body is designed to live in rhythm with the Sunday, to wake with light, to sleep with darkness, to adjust with the seasons. And when we honor that rhythm, everything works better. Sleep comes easily, energy is stable, mood is balanced. Hormones function properly. But when we ignore it, when we flood our evenings with artificial light and spend our days indoors, we create a biological dissonance that affects every system in the body.
10,000 years ago, circadian rhythms weren't something people thought about.
They were just part of life, as natural and inevitable as breathing. And that perfect alignment with the natural world didn't just govern sleep. It shaped something even more fundamental, the very creation of life itself. Life begins with reproduction, and 10,000 years ago, reproduction looked very different from what most of us experience today. Not the mechanics of it, those are largely the same, but the timing, the spacing, the risks, and the biology surrounding it. Paleolithic women's bodies were shaped by a life of movement, scarcity, and breastfeeding, all of which influenced when and how often they could conceive. And the children they bore were born into a world that was harsh, demanding, and unforgiving. Yet somehow, the species survived. And the way their bodies managed fertility, pregnancy, and early childhood offers us a window into just how different human biology can be when shaped by a completely different environment. Let's start with puberty. In modern industrialized societies, girls typically enter puberty around age 11 or 12. Some even earlier. But in Paleolithic populations, and in modern hunter-gatherer groups that still live similar lifestyles, puberty is delayed. Girls often don't begin menstruating until their mid to late teens, sometimes as late as 16 or 17 years old. This delay isn't a defect. And 17 years old, it's an adaptation. The body is reading signals from the environment, assessing whether there are enough resources, enough body fat, enough stability to support reproduction. When you're constantly moving, when food is variable, when your body fat percentage is low due to high activity levels, the hormones that trigger puberty, like leptin and estrogen, remain suppressed. The body essentially says, "Not yet, Wait until conditions are better. This delay had significant consequences. It meant that women had fewer total years of fertility, which in turn meant fewer pregnancies over a lifetime. While modern women can be fertile for 30 or more years, Paleolithic women might have been fertile for only 20 to 25 years. And within that window, natural birth spacing further reduced the number of children they could have. This spacing was largely controlled by one powerful factor: breastfeeding. When a woman breastfeeds exclusively, meaning the infant receives no other food or water, her body produces high levels of prolactin, a hormone that stimulates milk production. Prolactin also suppresses ovulation. This is called lactational amenorrhea, and it's a natural form of birth control. As long as the mother continues to breastfeed frequently, day and night, her menstrual cycle often remains suppressed for months or even years. In Paleolithic populations, where there was no formula, no cow's milk, and no alternative food sources for infants, mothers breastfed for extended periods, often 3 to 4 years per child. This meant that pregnancies were naturally spaced 3 to 5 years apart, giving the mother's body time to recover, giving the older child time to become more independent, and preventing the family from having more mouths to feed than they could support. This extended breastfeeding had other benefits too. Breast milk provided complete nutrition for infants, protecting them from malnutrition and dehydration. It also transferred antibodies from mother to child, strengthening the infant's immune system and protecting against infections. In a world without modern medicine, this immune support was critical. Infants who were breastfed for longer had better survival rates, and mothers who breastfed for extended periods had lower risks of certain cancers, particularly breast and ovarian cancer, because their bodies spent less time cycling through menstruation and ovulation, processes that involve repeated hormonal surges. Now, let's talk about childbirth itself. Giving birth 10,000 years ago was dangerous. There were no hospitals, no doctors, no painkillers, no surgical interventions. If something went wrong, if the baby was positioned incorrectly, if the mother hemorrhaged, if there was an infection, the outcome was often fatal. Maternal mortality was high. Some estimates suggest that as many as 1 in 10 women died in childbirth or from complications shortly after. This is a sobering reality. But for those who survived, the process was supported by the community. Birth was attended by other women, experienced mothers and midwives who had seen many births and knew what to expect. The laboring woman could move freely, squatting or kneeling in positions that worked with gravity and opened the pelvis. There was no lying flat on a table. Movement and positioning were instinctive. And here's something important. Paleolithic babies were smaller than modern babies, on average. This wasn't due to poor nutrition in most cases, but rather to the mother's active lifestyle and the natural variability of food intake. Smaller babies, generally between 5 and 7 pounds, were easier to deliver. The pelvis of a Paleolithic woman was also slightly different, shaped by a lifetime of squatting, walking, and varied movement. The bones and ligaments were conditioned to support the stresses of labor. This doesn't mean birth was easy. It was still painful, still risky, but the body was better prepared for it than many modern bodies are, especially those weakened by sedentary lifestyles and poor pelvic alignment. Infant mortality, however, was devastatingly high. Perhaps as many as 40 to 50% of children didn't survive past the age of 5. Disease, injury, malnutrition, exposure to the elements, accidents, all of these claimed young lives. This harsh reality shaped Paleolithic parenting. Children were cherished, protected, and kept close, often carried on their mothers' bodies for much of the day. But there was also an acceptance of loss that's hard for us to comprehend in the modern world, where infant death is rare and shocking. Death was part of life. It was expected. Grief was real, but survival demanded resilience. For the children who did survive, early childhood was spent in close physical contact with caregivers. They were breastfed on demand, carried during the day, and slept near their parents at night. This constant contact provided warmth, security, and emotional bonding. It also regulated the infant's physiology. Being held skin to skin stabilizes a baby's heart rate, breathing, and body temperature. It reduces stress, hormones, and promotes healthy brain development. Paleolithic infants received this contact naturally, not because their parents had read parenting books, but because it was the only practical way to care for a baby while also going about daily life. There were no cribs, no strollers, no separate nurseries. The baby was always with the mother or another caregiver, integrated into the rhythm of daily activity. Weaning, when it finally came after 3 or 4 years, was gradual. Children began eating soft foods, chewed by adults if necessary, and slowly transitioned away from breast milk. By the time they were fully weaned, they were old enough to walk long distances, communicate their needs, and begin learning the skills they'd need to survive. And because pregnancies were spaced so far apart, each child received years of focused attention and care before a new sibling arrived. There's also the role of communal parenting. In small, tight-knit groups, children weren't raised solely by their biological parents. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, and older siblings all played a role. This distributed the burden of childcare and provided children with multiple caregivers and teachers. It also meant that if a parent died, which was not uncommon, the child had a network of support to step in. This communal structure was essential for survival. So what does all of this tell us? It tells us that reproduction 10,000 years ago was carefully regulated by the body's response to the environment. Late puberty, extended breastfeeding, and natural birth spacing kept population growth slow and sustainable. Childbirth was dangerous but supported by community and shaped by bodies conditioned for the task. Infants received constant physical contact and immune support from extended breastfeeding, and children who survived were raised within a network of caregivers who ensured their development and integration into the group. It was a system shaped by necessity, by biology, and by the realities of a world that demanded resilience at every stage of life. But survival wasn't just about strength or endurance. It was also about awareness, about sensing danger before it arrived, and that required something extraordinary. Senses that were sharper, more attuned, more alive than most of ours are today. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Really listen. What do you hear? Maybe the hum of a refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the buzz of a light fixture. Now imagine stripping all of that away. No machines, no engines, no electrical hum, just the natural world. The rustle of leaves, the call of a bird, the snap of a twig under an animal's foot. 10,000 years ago, your ancestors lived in that world, and their survival depended on their ability to perceive it. Their senses weren't just sharper than ours. They were finely tuned instruments, honed by necessity, capable of detecting threats and opportunities that we would miss entirely. Let's start with vision. Paleolithic humans had excellent eyesight, not because their eyes were structurally different from ours, but because they used them differently. They spent their entire lives outdoors, scanning distant horizons for game, predators, or other groups. This constant practice at varying distances kept their eyes flexible and strong. The muscles that control the lens, allowing it to focus near and far, were exercised constantly. They didn't spend hours staring at screens inches from their faces. They didn't read small text under artificial light. Their eyes moved naturally between close objects and distant landscapes, maintaining a full range of focal ability. Modern humans, by contrast, often develop myopia or nearsightedness, especially in populations that spend years in formal education, reading books, and looking at screens. This isn't purely genetic. It's environmental. When the eyes focus on close objects for extended periods, especially during childhood when the eye is still developing, the eyeball can elongate slightly, making distant objects appear blurry. Paleolithic children didn't face this problem. They played outdoors, tracked animals, watched the sky, and rarely focused on anything closer than arm's length for long periods. As a result, their distance vision remained sharp throughout their lives. There's also the question of night vision. While humans are primarily diurnal, active during the day, Paleolithic people needed to navigate in low-light conditions, especially at dawn and dusk when many animals are most active. Their eyes adapted to this. The retina contains two types of photoreceptors: cones, which detect color and work best in bright light, and rods, which detect motion and work in dim light. Paleolithic humans likely had well-developed rod function because they regularly operated in low-light environments. No streetlights, no flashlights, just moonlight, starlight, and the dim glow of a fire. Their eyes learned to extract as much information as possible from minimal light, allowing them to see movement and shapes even in near darkness.
Then there's hearing. Sound was survival. The crack of a branch could mean a predator nearby.
The distant call of a bird could signal the presence of water or other humans. The rustle of leaves might indicate prey. Paleolithic humans lived in environments where every sound carried meaning, and they learned to distinguish between them with remarkable precision. This wasn't superhuman hearing. It was trained hearing. When you live in a world without constant background noise, when you're not bombarded by the roar of traffic, the hum of electronics, or the chatter of crowds, your auditory system becomes more sensitive. You can pick out subtle differences in tone, direction, and distance. Modern urban environments create what's called auditory masking, where constant background noise makes it harder to hear specific sounds. Your brain learns to filter out the noise, but in doing so, it also loses some of its sensitivity to quieter, more subtle sounds. Paleolithic humans didn't have this problem. Silence was common. When a sound occurred, it stood out. Their brains didn't need to filter through layers of noise to find the signal. The signal was clear, and this auditory clarity extended to their ability to localize sound, to determine exactly where a noise was coming from. This skill, critical for hunting and avoiding danger, was developed through years of practice in open, quiet environments. Smell is another sense that's been dulled by modern life. Paleolithic humans relied on their sense of smell to detect smoke from distant fires, the scent of water, the musk of animals, even the smell of rot or decay that might indicate danger or a potential food source. The human nose is capable of detecting thousands of different odors, but most modern people don't use this ability. We live in environments where smells are often artificial, perfumes, air fresheners, or industrial odors, and we're rarely called upon to distinguish between the scent of different plants, animals, or environmental conditions. But Paleolithic humans used their noses constantly. They could smell rain coming, detect the presence of certain animals, and even identify edible plants by scent alone. There's also something called olfactory memory, the strong connection between smell and memory. Because Paleolithic humans relied so heavily on scent, their olfactory memories were rich and detailed. A particular smell could instantly recall a location, a season, or an experience. This wasn't nostalgia, it was practical information. If a certain smell was associated with danger, recognizing it again could save your life. If it was associated with food or water, it could guide you to resources. Modern humans still have this capacity. We've all experienced a smell that instantly transports us to a specific memory, but we use it far less than our ancestors did. Touch and proprioception, the sense of where your body is in space, were also heightened. Paleolithic humans walked barefoot over varied terrain: rocks, sand, mud, grass, snow. Their feet developed thick, calloused soles, but they also retained sensitivity. They could feel the texture of the ground, detect subtle shifts in balance, and adjust their gait to avoid injury. This constant feedback from the feet kept their proprioception sharp. Modern humans wearing shoes with cushioned soles lose much of this sensory input. We walk on flat, predictable surfaces. Our feet become weak, and our sense of balance, which relies partly on feedback from the soles of the feet, diminishes. Proprioception also extends to the rest of the body. When you move through varied, unpredictable terrain, your body is constantly making micro-adjustments to maintain balance. Climbing over rocks, ducking under branches, crossing streams, all of these activities require precise awareness of where your limbs are and how they're moving. Paleolithic humans had exceptional body awareness because they used it every day. Modern humans, moving through controlled environments and sitting for long periods, often lose this awareness. We trip more easily. We misjudge distances. Our bodies become less responsive because they're not constantly challenged. While taste might seem less critical for survival, it actually played an important role in identifying safe versus dangerous foods. The human tongue can detect 5 basic tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. Bitterness is particularly important because many toxic plants are bitter. Paleolithic humans, especially children, had a strong aversion to bitter tastes, which protected them from poisoning. But they also developed the ability to distinguish between different types of bitterness, some dangerous, some merely unpleasant, but safe in small amounts. This nuanced sense of taste helped them navigate a world where every plant had to be evaluated for safety. All of these senses worked together, creating a complete picture of the environment. Vision spotted movement in the distance. Hearing confirmed it. Smell identified whether it was prey, predator, or something else. Touch provided information about the ground beneath their feet. And all of this sensory input was processed quickly, often subconsciously, allowing for rapid decision-making. This heightened sensory awareness wasn't magic. It was the result of a lifetime spent in environments where missing a signal could mean death. Modern humans have the same hardware, the same eyes, ears, nose, and skin. But we've lost much of the software, the training, the practice, the necessity that made our ancestors' senses so acute. And those senses weren't just housed in isolated parts of the body. They were wrapped in the largest organ we have, one that faced the elements every single day: your heart. Right now, as you rest, it's beating steadily, rhythmically, pumping blood through over 60,000 miles of blood vessels. It does this without you thinking about it, without you telling it to. It just works. But 10,000 years ago, your ancestors had hearts that worked differently. Not in structure, the anatomy is essentially the same, but in function, in efficiency, in resilience. Their hearts were shaped by constant movement, by a lifetime of walking, climbing, and carrying, and as a result, they were extraordinarily strong, capable of endurance that most modern hearts can only dream of. Let's start with cardiovascular fitness. When we talk about a fit heart, we're talking about one that can pump blood efficiently, delivering oxygen to muscles and organs without having to work too hard. The measure of this is something called resting heart rate, the number of times your heart beats per minute when you're at rest. The average modern adult has a resting heart rate of around 70 to 80 beats per minute. Athletes, people who train regularly, might have resting heart rates in the 50s or 60s. But Paleolithic humans, with their constant, low-intensity movement, likely had resting heart rates in the 40s or 50s, similar to elite endurance athletes today. And they achieved this not through structured training, but simply by living. Why does this matter? A lower resting heart rate means the heart doesn't have to work as hard to do its job. Each beat is more powerful, more efficient, pumping more blood with less effort. This reduces wear and tear on the cardiovascular system and allows the heart to function optimally for decades. Modern hearts, especially in sedentary populations, often beat faster because they're less efficient. They have to work harder to deliver the same amount of oxygen. Over time, this increased workload can lead to fatigue, stress, and eventually disease. But cardiovascular fitness isn't just about the heart. It's also about the blood vessels, the arteries and veins that carry blood throughout the body. In healthy, active individuals, these vessels remain flexible and elastic. Blood flows smoothly, blood pressure stays within a normal range. But in sedentary individuals, especially those with poor diets, the vessels can become stiff and narrow. Plaque builds up on the arterial walls, a condition called atherosclerosis. This plaque is made of cholesterol, fats, calcium, and other substances. It restricts blood flow, raises blood pressure, and increases the risk of heart attack and stroke. Paleolithic humans had virtually no arterial plaque. Studies of ancient remains, as well as modern hunter-gatherer populations, show remarkably clean arteries. Even in older individuals, there's little evidence of the kind of buildup that's so common in modern populations. Why? The answer lies in a combination of diet and activity. Paleolithic diets were low in the kinds of processed fats and refined carbohydrates that contribute to plaque formation. They ate whole foods, rich in fiber, omega-3 fatty acids, and antioxidants, all of which support vascular health. And their constant movement kept blood flowing smoothly, preventing the stagnation that can contribute to clot formation and plaque buildup. There is also the question of blood pressure. Normal blood pressure is generally considered to be around 120/80. But in many modern populations, blood pressure rises with age, often creeping into the hypertension range by middle age. High blood pressure strains the heart, damages blood vessels, and increases the risk of serious health problems. Paleolithic humans, however, maintained low, stable blood pressure throughout their lives. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer groups show that their blood pressure doesn't increase with age the way ours does. An older individual might have the same blood pressure as a younger one. This stability is a direct result of their active lifestyle, their whole food diet, and the absence of chronic stress.
Chronic stress is a major contributor to cardiovascular disease. When you're stressed, your body releases cortisol and adrenaline, hormones that increase heart rate and blood pressure. This is useful in the short term, preparing you to respond to a threat. But when stress becomes chronic, when these hormones stay elevated for long periods, they damage the cardiovascular system. Blood vessels become inflamed, the heart is overworked, plaque formation accelerates. Paleolithic humans experienced acute stress, the stress of a hunt, the stress of danger, but it was short-lived. Once the threat passed, their stress hormones returned to baseline. They didn't carry the constant, low-level anxiety that characterizes modern life. No work deadlines, no financial worries, no traffic jams, just the immediate demands of survival followed by rest. Another important factor is something called heart rate variability, or HRV. This is the variation in time between each heartbeat. You might think the heart beats at a perfectly regular interval, but it doesn't. There's actually a slight variation, and this variation is a sign of a healthy, adaptable cardiovascular system. High HRV means your heart can adjust quickly to changing demands, speeding up when needed, and slowing down when you rest. Low HRV, on the other hand, is associated with stress, fatigue, and increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Paleolithic humans, with their active lifestyles and low stress levels, likely had high HRV, indicating hearts that were responsive and resilient. Then, there's the role of inflammation. We've talked about inflammation before in the context of the immune system, but it's also relevant here. Chronic inflammation damages blood vessels, contributes to plaque formation, and increases the risk of heart disease. Modern diets, high in processed foods, refined sugars, and unhealthy fats, and promote inflammation. Sedentary lifestyles do the same. But Paleolithic diets, rich in anti-inflammatory compounds like omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and fiber, kept inflammation low. Their active lifestyles further reduced inflammatory markers. The result was a cardiovascular system that remained healthy and functional throughout life. There's also the simple fact that Paleolithic humans didn't sit. Sitting for prolonged periods, something most modern people do for hours every day, has been shown to increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, even in people who exercise regularly. When you sit, blood flow slows, especially in the legs. Muscles aren't contracting to help pump blood back to the heart. Glucose and fat metabolism slow down. Over time, this contributes to weight gain, insulin resistance, and increased cardiovascular risk. Paleolithic humans were constantly moving. They walked, squatted, climbed, and carried. Their muscles were always engaged, always helping to circulate blood, always burning fuel. Their hearts didn't have to work against the stagnation that comes from hours of sitting. And here's something interesting. The heart is connected to sleep. Poor cardiovascular health can disrupt sleep. High blood pressure, inflammation, and stress all interfere with the body's ability to relax and enter deep sleep. On the other hand, good cardiovascular health supports restful sleep. When your heart is strong and your blood vessels are clear, your body can settle into the restorative stages of sleep more easily. Blood pressure drops naturally during sleep, a process called nocturnal dipping. But in people with cardiovascular disease, this dipping is often blunted, meaning blood pressure stays elevated even during rest. Paleolithic humans, with their healthy cardiovascular systems, experienced proper nocturnal dipping, allowing their hearts to rest and recover each night. So when you think about the hearts of people who lived 10,000 years ago, Think about organs that were conditioned by a lifetime of use, hearts that beat slowly and efficiently, blood vessels that remained flexible and clean, blood pressure that stayed stable throughout life. And all of this was achieved not through medication or medical intervention, but simply through the way they lived. Movement, whole foods, low stress, and restorative sleep. Their hearts were built for endurance, for resilience, for the long journey of life in a demanding world. But the heart, as powerful as it is, doesn't work alone. It serves another organ, one even more complex, one that defined what it meant to be human. The brain, 3 pounds of soft tissue, folded and wrinkled, containing roughly 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others, creating a network so complex that we're still only beginning to understand it. This is the organ that makes you human, that allows you to think, remember, plan, create, and dream. And 10,000 years ago, your ancestors had brains that were remarkably similar to yours in size and structure. But the way those brains were wired, the skills they developed, and the experiences they encoded were profoundly different. Their brains were shaped by a world that demanded constant adaptation, spatial awareness, and social intelligence in ways that modern life simply doesn't require. Let's start with navigation. Paleolithic humans were exceptional navigators. They could travel across vast landscapes, sometimes covering hundreds of miles, and find their way back without maps, compasses, or GPS. They did this by developing an extraordinary sense of spatial memory. They memorized landmarks, the shape of a distant mountain, the bend of a river, the pattern of stars in the night sky. They tracked the position of the sun throughout the day and used it to orient themselves. They noticed subtle changes in vegetation, soil, and animal behavior that indicated direction or proximity to water. All of this information was stored in the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for spatial memory and navigation. Studies of modern populations that still navigate without technology show that their hippocampi are actually larger and more active than those of people who rely on GPS. The brain, like muscle, grows in response to use. Paleolithic humans, who navigated constantly, developed hippocampi that were robust and highly functional. Modern humans, who outsource navigation to devices, are losing this capacity. We've all experienced the frustration of being unable to find our way without a phone. But for our ancestors, getting lost could mean death. Their brains were wired to prevent it. Then there's working memory and attention. In a world without constant distraction, where survival depended on noticing details, Paleolithic humans developed exceptional powers of observation. They could track an animal by reading subtle signs in the environment, a broken twig, a faint footprint, a disturbed patch of grass. They could remember the location of seasonal plants, returning to them year after year. They could recognize hundreds of individual faces and recall complex social relationships within their group and with neighboring groups. All of this required sustained attention and the ability to hold multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously. Modern brains, by contrast, are bombarded with stimuli. Notifications, advertisements, messages, videos, all competing for attention. Studies show that the average person checks their phone dozens of times per day, fragmenting their attention into brief, shallow bursts. This constant switching between tasks impairs the brain's ability to focus deeply and retain information. Paleolithic humans didn't face this problem. When they focused on a task, tracking an animal, making a tool, telling a story, they could give it their full attention. Their brains developed the capacity for deep focus.
a skill that many modern people struggle to maintain for even a few minutes. Social cognition was also critical. Humans are social animals, and survival in the Paleolithic depended on cooperation, communication, and the ability to navigate complex social dynamics. Paleolithic groups were small, usually 20 to 50 individuals, and everyone knew everyone else intimately. But they also interacted with neighboring groups, forming alliances, negotiating resource access, and sometimes engaging in conflict. Understanding other people, reading their intentions, predicting their behavior, required sophisticated social intelligence. The brain regions involved in this, the prefrontal cortex, the temporal lobes, the amygdala, were constantly engaged. One fascinating aspect of this social intelligence is theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have thoughts, beliefs, and intentions that are different from your own. This skill is essential for cooperation, deception, teaching, and storytelling. Paleolithic humans excelled at it. They could anticipate how others would react, plan strategies based on social dynamics, and communicate complex ideas through language and gesture. Modern humans have the same capacity, but we often use it in different contexts, navigating workplace politics or online social networks rather than small, face-to-face communities. Storytelling was also central to Paleolithic life. Stories transmitted knowledge, reinforced social norms, and provided entertainment. Around the fire at night, elders told stories of hunts, of ancestors, of the natural world. These stories were remembered and passed down, encoded in the brain through repetition and emotional resonance. The act of storytelling itself engages multiple brain regions, language areas, memory centers, and emotional processing. Paleolithic brains were shaped by this oral tradition, developing strong verbal memory and the ability to construct and recall complex narratives. Modern humans, with written language and recorded media, rely less on memory and more on external storage, books, videos, databases. This has freed up cognitive resources for other tasks, but it's also weakened our natural capacity for memorization. Then there's neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt in response to experience. Paleolithic humans lived in environments that were constantly changing, presenting new challenges, new landscapes, new situations. This variability kept the brain flexible, constantly forming new neural connections and pruning away unused ones. Modern life, by contrast, is often highly predictable. We follow routines. We move through familiar spaces. We encounter the same stimuli over and over. This predictability, while comfortable, reduces the brain's need to adapt. Neuroplasticity declines when the brain isn't challenged. Paleolithic brains, challenged daily by novel situations, remained plastic and adaptable throughout life. Stress, however, was a double-edged sword. Acute stress, the kind that comes from a sudden threat, can actually enhance memory and learning. When you're in a dangerous situation, your brain releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that sharpen focus and encode the experience into memory. This is why traumatic or highly emotional events are often remembered vividly. Paleolithic humans experienced this acute stress regularly during hunts, confrontations with predators, or conflicts with other groups. But these stressful episodes were brief, followed by periods of safety and rest. The brain had time to recover. Chronic stress, on the other hand, damages the brain. When cortisol remains elevated for long periods, it can shrink the hippocampus, impair memory,
and reduce the brain's ability to form new connections. Modern humans often live with chronic stress, financial worries, work pressure, social anxiety, and this takes a toll on cognitive function. Paleolithic humans didn't experience this kind of prolonged stress. Their challenges were immediate and concrete, and once resolved, their stress hormones returned to baseline. Sleep, once again, plays a crucial role. During sleep, the brain consolidates memories, moving them from short-term to long-term storage. It also clears out metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours, a process facilitated by the glymphatic system, which is most active during deep sleep. Paleolithic humans, with their long, uninterrupted sleep cycles, gave their brains the time they needed to perform these essential maintenance tasks. Modern humans, with fragmented sleep and chronic sleep deprivation, often don't. This contributes to cognitive decline, poor memory, and increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. There's also the question of sensory input. Paleolithic brains were fed a rich diet of natural stimuli, the sight of landscapes, the sound of wind and water, the smell of earth and plants. These natural environments have been shown to reduce stress, improve mood, and enhance cognitive function. Modern environments, filled with artificial light, noise, and visual clutter, can be cognitively draining. The brain has to work harder to filter out irrelevant information, leaving fewer resources for deep thinking and creativity. So, what does all this tell us? It tells us that the Paleolithic brain was shaped by a life of movement, challenge, social connection, and immersion in the natural world. It was a brain that could navigate vast distances, remember complex information, read social cues, and adapt to constantly changing circumstances. It was supported by deep sleep, low chronic stress, and a diet that nourished neural function. Modern brains have the same potential, but we're often not using them the way they were designed to be used. We've outsourced memory, navigation, and attention to devices. We live in predictable, overstimulating environments, and we often don't give our brains the rest they need to function optimally. 10,000 years ago, the brain wasn't just an organ. It was a survival tool, honed by necessity and capable of extraordinary things. And now, as we near the end of this journey, it's time to step back and see what all of this means. So here we are, 15 chapters into a journey that's taken us back 10,000 years, into bodies that were built differently, that moved differently, that lived in a world we can barely imagine. We've walked through bones that could bear endless miles, muscles that never knew a chair, teeth that fit perfectly in jaws shaped by tough, fibrous foods, guts thriving with diverse bacteria, metabolisms that could switch fuels without effort, immune systems trained by dirt and microbes, sleep that followed the Sunday circadian rhythms, perfectly aligned with light and darkness, hearts that beat with the efficiency of elite athletes, and brains wired for survival, navigation, and deep social connection. All of this, every single piece, was part of what it meant to be human 10,000 years ago. But here's the question that's been hanging in the air this entire time. What does any of this matter now? You can't go back. You can't unplug from modern life, abandon cities, and live as a hunter-gatherer. And even if you could, would you want to? Life 10,000 years ago was hard. Infant mortality was high. Injuries could be fatal. There was no safety net, no medicine, no guarantee of food. The past wasn't a paradise. It was survival, raw and unfiltered. So why spend all this time looking back? Because understanding where we came from helps us understand where we are. And more importantly, It helps us see the mismatch, the disconnect between the bodies we still carry and the world we've built around them. Your genes haven't changed much in 10,000 years. Your DNA still codes for bones that expect to be loaded with weight, for muscles that expect constant, varied movement, for a gut that expects fiber and diversity, for a metabolism that expects periods of fasting, for an immune system that expects exposure to the natural world, for sleep that expects darkness and rest, for a brain that expects challenge, novelty, and deep focus. But the environment has changed completely. We sit for hours every day. We eat processed foods that didn't exist a century ago, let alone 10,000 years ago. We're surrounded by artificial light that confuses our circadian rhythms. We live in sanitized environments that deprive our immune systems of training. We outsource memory and navigation to devices. We fragment our attention across dozens of stimuli, and we wonder why we're tired, why we're sick, why we can't sleep, why we feel disconnected. The answer, at least in part, is that we're living in a world our bodies weren't designed for. This isn't about romanticizing the past or rejecting modern life. Modern medicine has saved countless lives. Technology has created abundance and opportunity. We live longer, safer, more comfortable lives than our ancestors could have imagined. But that comfort has come with trade-offs, and those trade-offs show up in our health. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune disorders, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders. These conditions were rare or non-existent in Paleolithic populations. They've emerged, and in many cases exploded, as our lifestyles have drifted further from the patterns our bodies evolved to handle. So, what can we do? We can start by recognizing the mismatch, by understanding that when you feel exhausted despite sleeping 8 hours, it might be because your sleep is fragmented by light and stress. When your joints ache and your bones weaken, it might be because your body isn't getting the load-bearing movement it expects. When your gut is in turmoil, it might be because you're not feeding the bacteria that keep it healthy. When you can't focus, it might be because your brain is overstimulated and undernourished by deep, meaningful engagement. None of this is your fault. You're not broken. Your body is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's just trying to function in an environment it wasn't built for. And here's the hopeful part. Small changes can make a difference. You don't have to become a hunter-gatherer, but you can move more. Not in a gym necessarily, but by walking, squatting, climbing, playing. You can eat more whole foods, more fiber, more variety. You can spend time outdoors, exposing yourself to natural light and natural environments. You can protect your sleep by dimming lights in the evening and keeping your bedroom dark and cool. You can give your brain periods of deep focus, free from distraction. You can reconnect with people face to face, building the kind of social bonds that our brains are wired for. None of this requires rejecting modern life. It just requires recognizing what your body needs and finding ways to provide it within the context of the world you live in. There's also something profound about honoring the body you've inherited. When you look at your hands, you're looking at hands shaped by millions of years of evolution, hands that once gripped stone tools and climbed trees. When you take a deep breath, you're breathing with lungs that carried your ancestors across continents. When you sleep, you're engaging in a process that's been essential to life for as long as life has had nervous systems. You are not separate from the past. You carry it with you, in your bones, in your cells, in the rhythms that still pulse through your body, even when the world around you has changed beyond recognition. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, Maybe take a moment to appreciate the body you're in, not for how it looks, but for what it is. A living connection to 10,000 years of human history. A system that's still trying, against all odds, to keep you alive, healthy, and functional in a world it was never designed for. It's doing its best. And maybe, by understanding it a little better, by recognizing what it needs and where the modern world falls short, you can help it do what it's always been built to do: survive, adapt, and rest. If you found something valuable in this journey tonight, a quiet like helps others find it too. And if there's a topic you'd like to explore next, drop it in the comments. I read them all. But for now, let your mind settle. Let your body relax. Let the knowledge we've shared tonight fade gently into the background as sleep takes over. You've traveled back 10,000 years. You've seen what your ancestors' bodies were really like. And now it's time to come back to the present, to your warm bed, to your safe space, and to the rest you deserve. Sleep well, and remember, the past is always with you, whispering through every breath, every heartbeat, every dream. Good night. So here we are at the end of our journey. Remember where we started? That question we asked at the very beginning. What if your ancestors' bodies 10,000 years ago were almost unrecognizable compared to yours? Well, now you know. They were different. Profoundly different. Not in some exotic, alien way, but in small, significant details that reveal just how much the human body can change when shaped by a different world. Denser bones, tireless muscles, straighter teeth, thriving guts, flexible metabolisms, robust immune systems, deep, restorative sleep. Hearts built for endurance, brains wired for survival. All of it, every single piece, was sculpted by the demands of a life we no longer live. And maybe that feels distant, maybe it feels irrelevant. After all, you're here, in the present, lying in bed, scrolling through a screen, living a life that has nothing to do with tracking animals, or gathering roots, or sleeping under the stars. But here's the truth. That ancient body is still inside you. The blueprint hasn't changed. Your DNA still expects movement. Your gut still expects fiber. Your eyes still expect natural light. Your brain still expects deep focus and social connection. Your heart still expects to be challenged by activity, not by chronic stress. And your sleep, that precious, fragile thing we all struggle with, still expects darkness, quiet, and safety. The problem is that the world has changed faster than our biology can adapt. 10,000 years sounds like a long time. But in evolutionary terms, it's barely a blink. Agriculture emerged. Cities rose. Industrialization transformed everything. And now, in just the last century, we've added electricity, cars, processed foods, screens, and a pace of life that would be unrecognizable even to someone born 200 years ago. Our bodies are trying to keep up. They're doing their best. But they're operating with software designed for a world that no longer exists. And that mismatch, that gap between what our bodies expect and what we're actually giving them, is at the root of so many modern struggles. You feel tired even after sleeping because your sleep is shallow, interrupted by light and stress, nothing like the deep, restorative rest your ancestors experienced. You feel stiff and achy because your body hasn't moved through its full range of motion, hasn't been loaded and challenged the way it expects. You feel anxious and unfocused because your brain is overstimulated, fragmented by constant notifications and demands. never given the space to settle into deep, meaningful work. You struggle with digestion because your gut isn't being fed the diversity and fiber it needs to thrive. None of this is your fault. You're not broken. Your body is just trying to function in an environment it wasn't built for. But understanding this, really understanding it, gives you power, because once you see the mismatch, you can start to bridge it. Not by abandoning modern life, not by moving to the wilderness and living off the land, but by making small, intentional choices that honor what your body needs. Move more, not just in structured exercise, but in varied, natural ways. Walk, squat, climb, play. Eat more whole foods, more plants, more fiber, more variety. Spend time outdoors. Let natural light hit your eyes in the morning. Dim the lights in the evening. Protect your sleep like it's sacred, because it is. Give your brain periods of deep focus, free from distraction. Connect with people face to face. Build relationships that matter. These aren't radical changes. They're gentle adjustments. Small steps back toward the patterns your body recognizes and responds to. Is less than #0. 7 is greater than, and here's what's beautiful about it. When you start aligning your life, even just a little, with what your body expects, things start to work better. Sleep comes more easily. Energy stabilizes. Digestion improves. Mood lifts. Focus sharpens. Not because you fixed something that was broken, but because you've removed some of the obstacles that were getting in the way. You've given your body a chance to do what it's always been designed to do: survive, adapt, heal, rest. So tonight, as you finally let go and drift into sleep, maybe think about this. You are not separate from your ancestors. You are them, carried forward through time. The same hands that shaped stone tools now type on keyboards. The same legs that walked 15 miles a day now carry you from room to room. The same brain that navigated by stars now navigates by GPS. The same heart that beat steadily around ancient campfires now beats as you lie in bed, scrolling, worrying, hoping for rest. You are a living bridge between the past and the present, and that body you're in, the one you sometimes criticize or take for granted, it's trying so hard to keep you alive in a world it was never designed for. Honor it. Listen to it. Give it what it needs, even in small ways. Move a little more, eat a little better, sleep a little deeper, and remember that the past isn't gone. It's encoded in your cells, in your rhythms, in the quiet whispers of your biology, reminding you that you are still fundamentally human. 10,000 years may have passed, but your body remembers. And when you work with it instead of against it, when you recognize the mismatch and gently close the gap, you give yourself the chance to thrive in a way that honors both where you came from and where you are now. If this journey resonated with you, if you learned something that shifted your perspective even just a little, go ahead and leave a like. It helps others find this content. And subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into biology, history, and the surprising ways our bodies connect us to the past. Drop a comment too. Tell me what surprised you most tonight, or tell me what you're going to try tomorrow. One small change, one step toward bridging the gap. But for now, let it all go. Let the science fade. Let the history settle. Let your mind release its grip on the day and sink into the stillness that's waiting for you. You've traveled back 10,000 years tonight. You've seen what your ancestors' bodies were really like. And now you're here, in the present, wrapped in warmth, safe, and ready to rest. Your body knows what to do.
It's been doing it for millions of years, so trust it. Let go and sleep, because tomorrow you'll wake up in a modern world. But you'll wake up with a little more understanding, a little more compassion, and maybe, just maybe, a little more connection to the ancient body that's been carrying you all along. Good night, and sleep well.